We will speak to Joseph Kotrie-Monson, human rights lawyer, in just a moment. First, Henry Bolton, international border control expert. Henry, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would take a punt that none of this particularly surprises you.
Not at all, Ian. Not in the slightest bit. I was saying it before, or as the thing was being discussed and negotiated, once it had been agreed, but before it was implemented, I was pointing out where the problems would lie. And indeed, I've been, I think, spot on. We've had two flights. The first one was supposed to have 6 people on board, as I understand it. The second one, 8. Neither or both flights took off without any returnees on board. And indeed, in the UK, it's being widely reported that the problem here is legal challenges. That's in part correct. And just to cover that, so if there is an outstanding claim that's been made in the UK that one of these people has been is a victim of human trafficking or of torture or anything like that, then they can't be sent back to can't be returned to France. Right. So what is happening now is that within the UK has to submit all the paperwork within or no later than 72 hours before the individual travels back to France. So if within that 72 hours an individual or their legal representation makes a claim that they've been trafficked, then it's too late to submit the paperwork to France, sort of talking about this, and the thing has to be put on hold. So fundamentally, the design of the agreement is flawed. There's a loophole there. The second thing is that in France, the argument is that actually the UK isn't providing them with enough paperwork anyway. So the UK under the agreement is required to do sort of due diligence into the individual's medical condition, their welfare condition, mental health condition, into whether or not they have been subject to torture or trafficking. It's a whole load of things. And we're supposed to do due diligence and demonstrate to the French with 72 hours before we send these people back that there's no problem and that they're no risk to the French either. But of course, if you've got, Bloggins who's come from, a rural village in, I don't know, Somalia or Sudan or somewhere, he may have documentation, but you still don't know anything about this individual's background. And really, you can't do the full checks that are required by this agreement. So the whole thing is flawed. It's flawed. The concept, it's badly conceived, badly designed. And of course, as a result, it can't be implemented. One thing about that you said just now about the legal sort of thing and the laws are constructed badly, the lawyers are saying, they're right. Of course, they can't find loopholes if there aren't any loopholes. And we've had a succession of acts of parliament: the Immigration Act 1971, the Asylum and Immigration Act 1999, the Nationality and Borders Act 2022, the Illegal Migration Act 2023. Then you've got the ECHR. You've got a plethora of these acts of parliament. And when I've helped other countries to address sort of border management and immigration and all sorts of threats on their borders, and one of the first things that I've invariably found is that you need to consolidate all of your border-related legislation into ideally one act of parliament. So you've tightened it up. You don't create a layer upon layer and and stick your finger in the dike over here and another finger in the dike over there with multiple pieces of legislation. What you've got to do is consolidate it all, and then you can close all the loopholes. You deal with the thing, and it's all up to date. As I say, some of our legislation goes back sort of 40, 50 years, 60 years in some cases. So it is a point, and it's back down to poor leadership and lack of knowledge as to how to deal with this within Westminster and Whitehall, for that matter. And
I suppose even allowing for this, this curious deal that was struck with France, and as you'll be more aware than me, Henry, this deal has been around for some years as a possibility. The Tories considered it for about half an hour and then decided not to run with it, perhaps because of these pitfalls and obvious areas where it could fall at the first hurdle. But overarchingly, it was massively in France's favour.
Yeah, well, in France's favour, the British government for years now, 2 decades at least, has had the idea that when we try to negotiate something, we don't look at what we're trying to achieve particularly. We look at it's a bizarre sort of framing. They try to look at what will the other party, in this case the French, agree to, because what they don't want to do is enter into negotiations and find that they fail. Well, that means that you're actually negotiating something that the other side is going to find perfectly convenient and easygoing. And we've had that problem throughout the whole Brexit negotiation process and various negotiations in all sorts of fields, whether it's trade, whether it's security, for 2 decades or more. I mean, I've watched it happen, and it's painful to watch it. And our partners think, what the, and I've worked in the diplomatic field for 20, 25 years at ambassadorial and level and with ministers, and they're looking at us and going, what has happened to the United Kingdom? There was a time when you came to the negotiating table, you knew precisely what you wanted, you knew precisely how to get it, and now we ask you what you want and you haven't got a clue. And that's the problem. We just haven't got any vision here. One final thing that's probably worth saying is that when we come to borders, we ought to look at the whole range of threats as well, because the French are increasingly doing that. It's not just about individual people. It's about the cocaine and the heroin, which is coming across the channel as well, a lot of it. And the French are concerned that, again, we're not addressing that. And that pulls it through the British market, pulls these things through France and Europe. And they don't like it, and rightly so, because a lot of it stops off en route. So, we are driving criminality by our failure to deal with this robustly. There needs to be a clear decision.
Indeed. And I guess just a final point, Henry, just to go back to the specifics of this French, this Anglo-French deal, what I suppose is daunting, to say the least, daunting for Keir Starmer, is that the people that they selected for deportation would have been the ones that they thought had the very best chance of France agreeing to. And of course, if those people failed, then there's a not unreasonable suggestion that there's not much hope of anyone else ever getting on one of those Air France planes.
I think yes, you're right, but they're looking at the individual. They're not looking at what the sort of the legal representation is doing behind that. And again, there are a lot of lawyers and charities who are funding legal action and legal charities who are actually because they don't, at a principle ideology, if you like, they are seeking ways to undermine these efforts to return people. And when you do, so they will always be active, even if the individual themselves is even maybe sort of kind of ambivalent towards being returned to France. Yeah. Then these people will, in any case, try to find one. And now I've heard today. Now I can't corroborate this, that they're even now trying to claim that these people going back to France will be destitute because France doesn't support them as well as we do. And therefore, that's a reason not to send them back. So this whole thing, unless we are incredibly robust, unless the government makes a very, very clear policy decision that these people will go back no matter what and drive that effort, then this is not going to end.
On that point, Henry, thank you, sir. Henry Bolton, International Border Control expert. Let's get a word from Joseph Kotrie-Monson, human rights lawyer. Joseph, good to have you on with us again. I mean, this is interesting, isn't it? I said at the beginning, look, I mean, people talk about lefty lawyers and blaming lawyers, and yeah, that's quite a fun parlour game for everybody to have a go at. Who doesn't want to have a pop at a lawyer, whether they're a conveyancer or a human rights lawyer for that matter? But you take the point. However, if there is a fundamental flaw, then the anger should be aimed at the law of the land and governments. Would that be a point we could both agree on?
If you don't like it, change it. And what people often find is that when they think through the consequences, as the politicians, Ian, that they elect or they've elected find out when they realise the consequences of change, changes might seem more attractive until you have to pick and choose. You realise you can't pick and choose.
I mean, this is the pick and choose point. This is a mess at the moment, isn't it?
Well, it's a mess, like every bit of populist policy that we've seen.
I mean, it's not really populist, is it? I mean, it's just kicking people out of the country who shouldn't be here. I mean, if you can't do that, if you can't do that as a country, something's gone horribly wrong. And deporting them to France, not Eritrea or Sudan.
We had the risk of trying to. Of not wanting to, really not wanting to sound patronising to someone who I have great respect for. Well, there's a process, isn't there, right? And saying that we're kicking out people who should be out of here, we've got a process. That process is governed by laws. You're right that there are laws that affect whether something can happen or not, and if you don't like them, you can change them. But I tell you what, this ECHR bashing, You know, these are basic rights that we afford to people born out of the abuses and the deaths of tens of millions of people across Europe alone in the Second World War. They're there for a reason, and they're not extravagant things. I have to say, I was impressed.
Laws can change, though, can't they?
Yeah, they can.
I mean, they can be fit for context and purpose at one time, and they sometimes need modifying. That's
your right. But when you're talking about something as simple as the right to life, the right not to be tortured, do we really want that fundamental principle to change?
We're not going to get tortured in France, are they? I mean, if you get on a flight, an Air France flight from this country to Paris, you'll be having a croissant and taking in the can by 6 o'clock. I mean, this is not Kathmandu. Come on, let's be honest about this.
Wonderfully put, Ian. You're entertaining me today. So you're right, but I think this business of, and I was about to say, Henry Bolton, impressed with the guy, 8 years as a police officer, great respect, police constable, doing it the hard way, and has done a great deal in terms of border control, and all of that is well documented. But I have to pick up on what I might charitably say, and hopefully not too cruelly, was a bit of lazy reading of the Telegraph article that I suspect that we've both read regarding the deportation of an Eritrean migrant, which is the only one that has been blocked in respect of that so far, not multiple. And he's a 25-year-old, and his lawyers have got a temporary injunction on the basis that he might be left destitute on the specific facts, not that all of a sudden the law is saying destitution and being poor or not as well off, all which I think are kind of
how would he be left? I mean, maybe you could explain it. How would he be left? He'd be sent to France, for goodness sake. He's not being sent back to Eritrea.
I don't know.
Not that we're at war with Eritrea, by the way. But
I don't know. No, I don't know, and neither do you. What's the specifics of his situation in terms of the possibility?
You could hazard a guess, and I could hazard a guess.
I don't know. I mean,
this is a lawyer trying it on, Joseph. You know that. And if you're a lawyer and you're getting paid bundles, I almost don't blame you.
Well, I'm not a human rights lawyer, although I didn't take the mistake from you as a disservice. They do great work. People in law adopting, I should say, for the purposes of my colleagues, I'm a fantastic criminal defence lawyer at Marymount and solicitors. But the reality is that
criminals need human rights too.
Yeah, you know, and I think that we all need human rights, and I think the fact is that it's the human rights of the person that you don't like that must be defended the most, because if not, you might be next. Now, as far as the specific facts of that individual are concerned, we just don't know. But it's not a decision. And we mustn't talk about these things as if this is the outcome. It's a temporary injunction in respect of the very first attempt. And we just don't know what the outcome's going to be.
OK, but would you agree, Joseph?
Let me say this. The purpose, and I won't be long, but the purpose of an injunction, or the purpose of an interim order in this case, is not to decide the matter. It's to allow a judge the time to consider it, allow both sides to put evidence together. And didn't we hear, quite rightly from Henry Bolton, this 3-day deadline thing is way too rushed anyway. There isn't time to go into all of this stuff. They're hastily putting it together. And it's a natural consequence of that there has to be a delay, because the government, for populist reasons, is trying to compress something that is about people's lives, people who we know at the very least have come a very long way.
And there's a lot of other people's lives as well here. The taxpayer that has to fund all of this. We're in a place where
of these people,
we're talking
Ian,
billions of pounds.
I tell you what, Ian,
poor people are funding.
Let me say this. 2/3 of these people, as a result of court proceedings and a process which is governed by law, using our judiciary, are judged to be, by the end of that process, and the statistics are there, it's the government's own statistics, Ian, judged to be genuine asylum seekers.
And you know how easy it is to circumnavigate that system, because it's the thing you can't disprove. You say to a judge, Joseph, this person's been trafficked. You say to a judge, this person's changed their religion. You say to a judge, this person can't go back to Iran or whatever because they've become a Christian. Nobody can disprove any of that. So erring on the side of caution.
Judges don't operate on the basis.
What else can they operate on? If you're a lawyer and you say, here's my client, he came over from Iran. Unfortunately, he became a Christian. If he goes back, they're going to hang him by the neck in the streets, or he's gay. So you can't disprove that. And as a lawyer, that would be the first line of defence. What do you think the
likelihood of somebody fleeing Iran, realistically, somebody freeing Iran, one of the worst regimes in the world, that you and I would give the shirts off our back and everything we owned not to be deported?
That's not you've just let the cat out the bag. You've let the cat out the bag. You don't like where you live.
You make a point, you let me ask, and you don't let me get to the end of it. Please allow me to do that. You know, the reality is that the proportion of the people who come from certain countries who are genuine asylum seekers, because just the act of fleeing makes it impossible for them to return, because we know what those places are like. There might be other examples, I think we probably would both agree, where it's more of a grey area. But Ian, Iran, that ain't the example. These are places
Iran,
that
because you don't like your country is not a reason to say I should be able to go anywhere else.
Well, with respect, it depends on
I don't like this one quite often, but I don't think I've got a right to go and live anywhere else. Listen, Joseph, we have to stop there. I'm not cutting in, but thank you, sir, for your time. Joseph Kotrie-Monson, he's not a human rights lawyer, but he is a lawyer of some note, and he knows that area backwards too.